Can creatine supplementation help with brain injury and concussion recovery? My name is Dr. Paul Hrkal. I'm here to quickly talk to you about this topic. Creatine's all the rage right now in the online kind of do-it-yourself wellness space. We're talking about creatine, not just for muscle function, but there's talk about creatine for brain function as well as you age. And so, of course, right now, talking about it specifically for women around menopause, there's some brain issues with the lack of estrogen. So of course, creatine's getting its time in the spotlight. This is also a very recent Medscape article that came across my desk, and I said, you know what, I'm just gonna make this video because I talk about creatine in the Concussion Fix course. I talk about it with my patients, and there are some really specific things that you should know if you're considering creatine. So I'll just tell you, this article did go into some of the research and really wanted to make a summary for other doctors that maybe are hearing about creatine and don't really know what it's all about. If you've been living under a rock, creatine basically increases your body's ability to produce energy. And after a concussion, you have an energy crisis. The mitochondria become overwhelmed because they're trying to survive after the changes in the mitochondrial membrane. There's a ton of excitotoxicity, and all our energy currency, ATP, which is right over here on that in red over on the right side, is used up. And then of course, cellular functions start grinding to a halt, and you don't have enough ability to produce that ATP, and you get symptoms: headaches, dizziness, light sensitivity, fatigue is a huge one. And so really what creatine does, it provides almost like a backup fuel source, an emergency fuel source, if you will, for your cells. And so there's research showing benefits in muscle function. There's research showing benefits in bone health. There's research showing benefits in the decrease in muscle loss as we age, known as sarcopenia. So we've known about this evidence for decades, but now some of the evidence around memory and cognitive function in women and men that are over the age of 40. This is now starting to come out. Again, it's still very preliminary, and that's exactly what the Medscape article made the point of saying, is that there's some preliminary research, but overall, as you'll see by the end of this video, creatine is very, very safe. So where do we get creatine from? And what are the factors that may kind of predispose you to need more? First of all, creatine comes from your diet. Your liver and your brain do make it. It is part of the energy system. So it's like, think of it like a generator backup system when our body runs out of the basic energy and our brain runs out of things like glucose. We get it from primarily meats. Creatine is stored a lot in muscle. And so of course, that's one of the best sources. The more it's cooked, the more it's denatured, and you're not going to get it. So think of like a medium well steak, or less, like medium or medium rare, has even higher levels of creatine. You also can supplement it as a powder. Almost every single supplement on the market is about 5 grams per scoop. It's a pretty tasteless white powder. And there's research like this coming out, 2026 study. Again, small group of healthy adults. They were sleep deprived, and this is exactly one of the situations that researchers have found that have lower levels of creatine in the brain. When you're sleep deprived, you have depression as you age, and this is where the whole aging aspect comes in, and in TBIs and concussions. And this is exactly what we're talking about. This is really relevant to anybody that is concerned about recovering from a brain injury. The dosage that they found in this study was about 14 grams, and 1 scoop is about 5 grams, so that's equivalent about 3 scoops of a regular creatine product. Typically, the higher the dose, the better its ability to get into the brain. You can see that it's transported here through a particular pathway that passed the blood-brain barrier. What about specifically in concussions? So there's some animal model research showing that it decreases a lot of the things that we'd want to improve after a concussion. So for example, cellular injury, inflammation, and some of the markers of energy production at the level of the mitochondria. In humans, and this is the one, I think, claim to fame around creatine, it does actually have a human clinical trial, and this was again in young people that sustained moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. So it wasn't a massive study with a lot of different people. It was a very specific population, and they basically gave creatine to people around the dose of 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight through a nasogastric tube. So they were in the hospital and they were basically given creatine as part of their feeding regime right after a concussion. So there wasn't pre-supplementation, there was post-supplementation. And they found some pretty substantial improvements, as you can see with this graph. The creatine group had a substantially reduced fatigue, dizziness, and headache scores. So this is really where this is where the human clinical research comes in combination with the animal studies. This graphic produced by this particular research paper does a really good job at summarizing it. So let's spend just a minute of understanding it. Again, this is in general now, we're not talking about concussion. So I think that there is some evidence, we just talked about that, but I think the stronger evidence is in obviously sports performance, in physical training, being able to kind of push out a few more repetitions, your water accumulates inside your cells. That's why you get a little bit of kind of like muscle swelling, which is actually a good thing. That does help with what's called hypertrophy. And it really does help with kind of that last couple extra reps, which does translate into better strength. A couple other things that it kind of points out. You do get some from diet, and we can increase that through supplementation. The forms up here are creatine monohydrate all the way to creatine magnesium chelates. By far, all the research is on monohydrate, which is why they give it 4 stars. I think it's a fairly simple supplement. We don't need to get super fancy around it. And it's fairly inexpensive. But I think there's a purity problem with creatine. I think this is something that the researchers do point out. And if you do talk to experts that actually are in the know, they will make sure that they're using creatine that is third-party tested to make sure that it does have creatine in it, and it's not adulterated or it's not contaminated with things like heavy metals. So you do get what you pay for, even though it's a pretty mainstream supplement. So creatine monohydrate makes the most sense. The dose does make a difference. And so you can see at the bottom here, this graphic does give you a little bit of a dosing summary. So the typical dose is 5 grams a day. Classically, there's been this idea of let's saturate the muscles with creatine, and in the case of concussion, the brain as well. So there's what is called a loading dose. So for a week, you do a much higher dose, let's say around 20 grams of creatine a day, and that does saturate the muscles faster. You do end up getting to the same point if you do 5 grams over the span of a month. It just takes a little longer to get there, and you have less side effects. There are some digestive upset issues that do happen around higher doses, and so starting slowly and working your way up definitely mitigates that. There are some benefits at a second tier of dosage around 10 grams. So you're going to get bone benefits. You're going to get the effects of decreasing stress and the ability to cope with symptoms that come from stress, like sleep deprivation. That was that study we just talked about on the previous slide. And then it seems like the brain and neurological benefits occur at 20 or 25 grams of creatine. It has been studied at higher levels, even than that. And so it may come down to your muscles are so greedy for creatine, it's going to suck up as much creatine as it needs, and there's not much left over at lower doses. So some patients will report that they get more benefits at higher doses. And then the final big thing is going to be safety. A lot of people talk about creatine messes up kidney function. I already talked about the GI side effects. You do get water retention. The water retention one's easy. That one goes away eventually. And all the research shows that kidneys are not negatively impacted. But if you are taking creatine and you do blood work, there is a marker called creatinine, which is a marker of kidney function. And that will go up if you supplement with creatine. And your doctor that doesn't maybe know that you're supplementing with it will call you and say, what is going on? Your creatinine is through the roof and it looks like your kidneys are malfunctioning. That's because you're taking creatine. So if you just avoid it, and that will go back to normal. But that doesn't mean that your kidneys are becoming damaged. It just means that creatine is getting converted to creatinine in the kidneys, and therefore it looks like your kidneys are damaged when they're actually not. couple other things here is just to point out people that really could benefit from it are people like vegans, which don't really get a lot of creatine in their diet. Omnivores, and especially ones that have animal meats in their diet, are getting some, may still benefit from it, but really the people that have the lowest levels, like vegans, vegetarians, those that don't touch meat, they're going to even have lower levels, so therefore they're going to have the most benefit. But either way, it seems like they could be beneficial for both omnivores and vegetarians. And there's some buzz about women supplementing with creatine more. It used to be only for kind of gym bros that wanted to increase their muscle mass and improve their ability to lift weights and make it heavier weight lifting. But now it seems like there's benefits like osteoporosis and things that really start impacting women after menopause. So I think that's where the creatine research is going. And I do think there's something to it. So overall, very safe. I think for concussions, it makes sense because it is so safe and it does have a beneficial effect on the mitochondria, which are impaired after a concussion. The sooner a person can start it, the better. But maybe it's something to talk to your naturopathic doctor to maybe start, even if you are months or even years after concussion. Hopefully you found this beneficial. Like and subscribe if you like more information about concussions and natural wellness, and I'll see you in the next video.